But there's some history that we need to be extremely aware of before we get to that, okay? So what I'm going to do now, and everything that I'm reading to you is a lot of information, but I'm just going to read it off to you. But this information, if you want a copy of it, we're going to put it in our upcoming newsletter, okay? So you will have access to it. So that's why we're telling you, step one, go to sambatree.com. And then if you go there, you should get a pop-up. They'll say, subscribe, to our mailing list. Just put your email in there. And then we're going to, and then from there next week, when we push that newsletter we'll make sure that you're part of it. OK, so that you can get it. It's free, and, it's no strong arm tactics. You better buy this. No, we just want to get the information out. OK, because I was either that or me create something totally separate. And I said, that's just too much for me to manage. I'm not trying to do all that. All right. So what we're going to do is this. We're going to go through a little bit of history here. Now, many times we talk about, when we talk about the medical industry, when we talk about the pharmaceutical industry as it pertains to black folks and what they've done, to us throughout history, more often than not, when black people bring that up, we only talk about the Tuskegee syphilis study. That's the only one we bring up. And they try to cobble together some argument to kind of say, well, that was such a long time ago, that kind of nonsense. But there's more. I hope you know that, okay? There's many, many more cases. This is just a few of the cases that has taken place. The reason why I'm saying this, again, these are the same people who today that many of our black doctors work for, okay? Ultimately, this is who they work for. They push their product. So today what we're doing is we're going to look at their history. Okay, we're going to look at their history. So let me go ahead and read this, go through this list here. And again, I'll make this available. Anybody, on our mailing list. Okay, so of course we said the Tuskegee syphilis study, that was 1932 to 1972. And most of y'all already know, but for those in the house that you may have just heard the name but didn't know what was going on, I'm going to read the description, okay? So just real quick, it says 600 African-American men were not informed of the syphilis diagnosis and were denied treatment to study the disease progression, okay? I'm just going to do it quick because if I spend too much, I could spend a whole lot of time on each, but you got me, all right? In the 1950s, there was the birth control pill trials, all right? Trials for the birth control pill were conducted on poor, mostly African-American women in Puerto Rico without full disclosure of risk. Okay. That was in the 1950s. In the 1960s, in Mississippi, appendectomy. Let's see. They said African-American women were subjected to involuntary sterilizations, often during unrelated medical procedures. Now, this was in Mississippi, but they was also doing this in North Carolina too. Okay, so they were doing that all over the place. Okay, in the 1980s and the 1990s, African Americans were disproportionately affected by AIDS, HIV, but underrepresented in clinical trials for treatments. Now, that's what they're saying, but I'll give you a little bit more on that. We've done videos on HIV, AIDS, HIV, and where that really came from and how that came about. Real short, it started in Africa. No, it wasn't some green monkey that was walking down the street and said, okay, I'm going to hawk and spit on somebody and I'm going to pass my disease on to these black folks. No, it didn't come that way. No, it was some doctors that went over there and were doing a series of very horrific experiments on all of these monkeys, these monkeys that they were paying the natives of that land when they were out there to go and get them, put them in cages, and they were just doing all kinds of experiments on them. And they was like, okay, well, what is this? Well, we tested their blood. What's this? Oh, this is kind of weird. Look at the impact it has on the immune system. Okay, well, we're going to take this back to America. And then what we're going to do, and then somehow it ended up in Ronald Reagan's America, where during that time, he wasn't playing when it came to the gay. He didn't like gay folks. He didn't like them. And so, but somehow it ended up in their community, right? And all of a sudden they getting AIDS all over the place, right? And then, but it wasn't just them, because you're talking like in the West Coast, San Francisco and all that area, right? but it was also black folks all throughout. It was somehow it was getting to the gays on the West Coast and also in places like New York and Miami, but it was also impacting straight black people. Okay, see, this one I do want to take a little bit of time with, because see, we cannot be a people that suffer from amnesia when it comes to this stuff. So it was going. So anyway, but all of a sudden, they started turning the tide. They were saying, well, thankfully we came out with a pill that's going to reverse all this stuff. And what was happening was that the HIV rates were going down amongst white people. I'm talking about gay white people. And so what they were putting out there was saying that, well, thankfully the reason why this is happening is because our message about practicing safe sex is getting out there, and these guys out here, they still living their lives, but they're using a condom, and now they're using it. But these ignorant black folks, on the other hand, they can't even spell condom. We're trying to give them away for free and all of that, and they still ain't doing it. They don't know how to use a condom and all this. So they try to portray us. When you go back into the history of this stuff, it makes you angry how they portrayed us to try to make it seem as if black people were too dumb and ignorant and stupid to figure out how to wear a condom. Meanwhile, you had all of these the white men, on the other hand, they kind of figured it out. Well, the truth of the matter is, what was causing this? It was a combination of the drug use that was going on in these communities, and it was the drug use, and it was the prescription, the drugs that were given, the pharmaceuticals that were being given to these people. And of course, when you have that combined with the disease that was taking place, when you are basically putting that back there, do I need to say anything else? It creates a concoction of just, it makes it dangerous, and it causes people to get sick and all that. But here's an answer. Well, the answer that they was given was causing people to get even more sick, and then the immune stuff happening and all that. So that's where it came from, basically. That's where it came from. And so anyway, but then black folks, they was so all of a sudden now white people seem like they're doing well. I said, wow, I said, this is amazing. White people, I would say white people and Magic Johnson. White people and Magic Johnson, they were the only two, they were doing fine. They figured it out and they were doing fine. But rest of black folks, it's y'all just too dumb and ignorant. You just don't even know. You don't know how to control yourselves. And sadly, and what's unfortunate is that a lot of our people buy into that. That's what's sad. And so what happens is a lot of our people, we keep going to the doctors, and the doctors will say, okay, here, try this. Okay, try this. Okay, try this. I don't know if it's going to work or not, but just try it anyway. And it's perpetuating the condition that our people are suffering from. But it makes you angry when you sit back and think about how they portrayed us to make it seem like we were ignorant and too stupid to figure this out. And unfortunately, a lot of our people are still in that category. They just don't want to know. They want to depend on someone just because they have a white coat. All right, let's continue. So that was the AIDS thing. All right. Henrietta Lacks, of course, you know about that. That was in 1951. Cells from Henrietta Lacks' cancer biopsy were used without her consent to create the first immortal human cell line, the HeLa cells. Okay, so yeah, they took her stuff, and then the pharmaceutical companies, they took it and ran with it, and they created all kinds of stuff with it. All kinds of stuff with it. And I think the only thing they gave her family was like a plaque and a handshake or something like that. It just like that. Anyway, let's move on. 1951 to 1974. I've spoken about this one as well. The Holmesburg prison experiments. Okay, this is another one. And then this one took place again, 1951 to 1974. African-American inmates at Holmesburg prison were subjected to dermatological research without their consent involving exposure to hazardous substance. This one infuriates me. This one, all of them do, but this one makes me mad. Because number one, it took place in my backyard. This took place in Philadelphia. But what makes me very angry at this one, because I've seen the pictures. There's even a book on this. I've seen the pictures literally stripping the skin off of black men in the prison with all kinds of chemicals and stuff like that. And guess who the doctor was who was leading it? It was a Jewish doctor. And why do I mention that? Well, because these experiments took place in 1951. That was just a sneeze away from the war, where allegedly they were undergoing similar stuff. But yet there was nothing done about these men being led by somebody who claims to be a part of those people. Nothing was done about these men. They used these black men, the lives of these black men, and they were doing. And then when you read it, because I went through the report on it, I mean, you had different chemical companies. They were all back there. Okay, now try this one. Next time you go in there, now try this one. Try this one and tell us what you think. In the prisons. And honey, if you think that stopped, they don't do that now. Let me tell you something. That still happens. And then we can even talk about, which I'm not going to touch today. We can even talk about how these individuals in the foster care system, how they are raised up in an environment where they're just thrown all kind of pharmaceuticals. It still happens. Anyway, so that was the Holmesburg prison experiments. That was in 1951, 1974. Let's continue. Now I'm going to move a little bit. Lead paint study. The lead paint study, this was in 1993 to 1999. African-American children in Baltimore were exposed to lead paint in a study to measure the effectiveness of lead abatement measures. Okay, 1993 to 1999. Now, you know, lead paint been around longer than that, but this is a particular study. Like I said, again, I just got a handful of them here. The Chicago malaria experiment. This was in 1940. African-American prisoners in Chicago were deliberately infected with malaria as part of a study on the disease and its treatments. Deliberately infected. All right, 1940. The Harlem Hospital experiment. African Americans giving birth at Harlem Hospital were given placebos instead of pain medication as part of a study on pain perception during childbirth. Now, we can put an asterisk on that one because the answer that Advil is trying to propose to black folks, it kind of ties to this because, as you know, the medical industry has this belief that, you know, had a belief for the longest time that black people, we can endure pain a lot longer than other groups. And we're going to talk about that. And I'm going to show you how they're manipulating that. Okay. All right. And then the last one here, the Cincinnati radiation experiments. Oh, yeah, they use radiation, too. This is in 1960 and 1970. African-American cancer patients at the University of Cincinnati were subjected to excessive radiation exposure without their informed consent as part of a study on radiation effects. Now, again, that's just African Americans. OK, now I can go down the list here on our brothers and sisters in the Caribbean. OK, I'm going to hit this real quick. This is in the 1950s, Puerto Rico birth control trials. And this is in the 1950s. Trials for the birth control pill were conducted on poor women in Puerto Rico without full disclosure of risk and side effects. The Haiti cholera outbreak. This is in 2010. The UN peacekeeping mission was implicated in the introduction of cholera to Haiti, leading to a widespread outbreak and thousands of deaths. I remember this one. I remember that one. All right. And back in Puerto Rico again, cancer experiments in 1930 to 1950. Dr. Cornelius P. Rhodes conducted experiments on Puerto Rico cancer patients, allegedly injecting them with cancer cells without their consent. All right. 1990s, the Dominican Republic HIV study. A study of on HIV transmission in the Dominican Republic faced ethical concerns regarding the informed consent of participants and the withholding of available treatments. All right. That was 1990s. Okay, 1970 to 1980, Jamaica lead poisoning study. A study on lead poisoning in Jamaican children raised ethical questions about the exposure of participants to high levels of lead and the lack of informed consent. All right, this is in 1990, Barbados asthma study. An asthma study in Barbados faced scrutiny over ethical concerns, including the adequacy of informed consent and the potential risk to participants. All right. In the 2000s, we had the Trinidad diabetes study. A study on diabetes in Trinidad raised ethical issues regarding the recruitment of participants and the clarity of informed consent procedures. There's a theme going on here. I don't know if you're catching it or not. Guadalupe pesticide study in the 2000s. A study on the effects of pesticide exposure in Guadalupe faced ethical challenges related to the informed consent, here we go again, of participants and the communication of risk. All right, two more, y'all. 2010, Bahamas breast cancer study. A study on breast cancer in the Bahamas raised concerns about the ethical considerations of genetic testing and the privacy of participants' genetic information. And then finally on our list, we had the Cuban lung cancer vaccine trials. This is in 2010 as well. Clinical trials for a lung cancer vaccine in Cuba face ethical scrutiny regarding the informed consent process and the transparency of trial results. Okay. Now, there's many others that I can point to. Many others. I'm recalling. I remember this one time I was young. You know, when you're little, when you're older, you have these flashbacks of when in your childhood, right? And I had a flashback, every summer I used to go, we take the Amtrak train, my mom and I, we would go down south and visit, my grandmother, her mother. And I remember the front door was open because, they would leave the front door open and you got the screen there and all of that. And I remember my grandmother, I can hear her say, "Oh, the bug man coming." And some of y'all there in the South, you can probably relate to this. And it was a truck. I can still see it. It was like a gray truck. It was like a tanker, short truck, and it was going real slow. And it was spraying this bug spray, basically. And it was and the whole street, you could see it just the spray is like a cloud, white cloud. You could see just taking over the whole community. And it'll be out there for a little bit, and then it'll just disperse. Come to find out, and this is something that, people who grew up in the South, they were using DDT. Now, this is a chemical that's very harmful to the body. I mean, it was causing all kinds of diseases and stuff like that. Now, I'm not that old, and I still remember seeing the truck. This is down south somewhere, right? So like I said, some of y'all can remember that. And there was another thing. I was actually looking at this with my aunt. We were doing something we were talking about air quality. It was a video I did or something. We were talking about air quality in a particular county in South Carolina. And we somehow, I don't know how we arrived at this, but she gave me a bunch of information. But a lot of times when we think about black folks picking cotton and then the processing of the cotton and all of that, this one aspect of that we don't think about, and this air quality. And so what I did was we looked at these counties, the set of counties in South Carolina, and I noticed that the cancer rates were extremely high, dealing in the area of respiratory. And what they were saying was, come to find out, there was a correlation between that and the processing of cotton. For some of you, you might be, depending on how deep you are in the country, if you live near a plant where they're processing cotton, sometimes they just let that stuff just fly in the air and it'll be like little bits of cotton. Well, those fibers, a lot of times, if you take in too much of it, it can be very hazardous to you. And a lot of these little factories and stuff that do process that stuff, they're located in areas where there's a lot of black folks. And so, I started seeing there was a correlation, and I said, okay, where these plants are, I'm seeing that there's a lot of, or processing plants, I'm seeing that there's a higher rate of this certain type of cancer. Then I said, well, let me go out a little bit. Let me look at these other counties that don't have them. Let me see if that cancer exists. I didn't see it. So this is a whole nother thing. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff we can talk about. So anyway, so that information I just read to you, along with what I'm getting ready to read to you now, that's all going to be in our newsletter.